Hello, everyone, and welcome to the next instantiation of the Jewish Book Club reading The Great Relationship by Rabbi Jonathan Sachs. This week we had the great pleasure of reading chapters 3, 4, 4, 5, and 6, Finding God, What We Stand to Lose, and Human Dignity. It looks like our great friend Ben is not going to be able to show up today, but the rest of us are here and trucking through.
Trey apparently is still asleep because of his jet lag, but he left some notes on the Discord in the book club channel.
France, not even once. See what happens when you go to France? Unbelievable.
Too much wine and cheese.
Too much wine and cheese. He wined and dined himself, and now he's in a food coma.
Good for him.
Jacob, you can make me smaller again, please. Oh, okay. Everything is right in the world again. Now, is there anyone who wants to go first, or should we force Sandy through the trauma of going first yet again?
Well, I mean, I could read, or you could read Trey's notes on the Discord.
Well, I was going to give him like 30 minutes to see if he wakes up, and then...
Hey.
Emma volunteered.
Oh.
Sure. My cat distracted me, and we'll count that as volunteering. I am trying to think about what jumped out at me. His argument that about like over universalizing God was interesting, I think. His like how philosophy ruined religion kind of argument. I don't know if I have something specific to say about it, but it jumped out at me.
I have something specific to say about it. It was bad.
All right.
2 thumbs down on that one.
What was bad about it?
Well, first of all, see, I have a little note here. Well, one of the problems is he's kind of quoting the logical positivists, and so here he quotes A.J. Ayer. I have this quote I found, and well, the problem with logical positivism is that it's basically like nobody believes it. It's completely discredited. So here's a quote from Ayer that he mentions his book, Language, Truth, and Logic. A.J. Ayer quipped that the most important defect of logical positivism was that nearly all of it was false. Right? And so he kind of has this like weird, it's just weird to kind of say that the logical positivists debunked or ruined something when their whole system like debunked itself, right? It was so terrible that nobody actually believes it. And also kind of on page 87, he says like, oh, you know, the Enlightenment dream of reason is problematic because it's like reason is universal while meaning is local. But like when he says that the dream, that it's a dream destined to fail because it's universal, that seems to be itself a universal claim, right? To make the claim that like meaning is particular is a universal claim, right? That meaning in all places is particular. And so it seems like a contradiction where like if in all places in the universe meaning is particular, then like how did the rabbi come to that conclusion? Like if he came to it through reason, I don't know. It just doesn't seem to be very coherent.
Yeah, I thought I wasn't sure why he picked those particular philosophers to talk about how philosophy devolved into discussions about what words mean, as opposed to like the regular menu of kind of classic philosophy, right? So I would have like thought more about like the French continental school, like Derrida, and I mean maybe even like Foucault and some of those other philosophers. Like, so I followed his general idea, but I didn't gel with his examples. But I also didn't connect it to what he was talking about with the particular expression of meaning versus universal. I mean, his soup. You can't eat the platonic form of soup. I thought that was a pretty funny example. But I don't know. I mean, isn't that like, you know, the moral relativists, right, who say that, you know, moral relativism is true, absolutely, right? That's kind of like the gotcha. I don't really know how you can avoid that gotcha, but I don't know if I want to apply it here. Because I think he's right. Like, I think that, I think like the idea of over-applied generalizations or universal application becomes what ends up causing, you know, mass murder and things like that, right? It's kind of like Ivan Karamazov from the Brothers Karamazov, right? Like, he loves humanity in general. He's like the atheist, right? But he loves humanity but hates humans, right? And I think that's the point that the rabbi is kind of making, or at least it's what connected in my brain on that section.
Well, I guess I have some thoughts. I think the reason why Rabbi Sachs chose these philosophers is because he seems like he learned from analytic philosophers, and there's something in analytic philosophy called the linguistic turn, which is why like people started focusing on language and stuff like that. It's kind of particular to the Anglo and American kind of philosophical tradition. But I guess one problem I still have with this idea is on page 94 he talks about like seeing in people, what does he say, like seeing in people like God, right, or something like that. And the problem, at least I felt like with the soup analogy, is if we take the rabbi's statement that you can only see it in the particular, but he sees the same God in everyone, that's a universal. And how can you then see the one God in it? That would be the Platonic soup. But you only see it in the, you know, particular individual. So that's going to be their flavor of the soup. And so it seems like he's contradicting himself if he thinks it's ridiculous to see the universal. Right here, universally seeing God in people, is his soup analogy not then like able to be used against him? I don't know.
Ultimately, it seems to me like he was getting back to a lot of what we talk about in terms of the Trinity and hypostases and, you know, the transcendent God versus representations of God. And I think that ultimately he does believe that it's revelation which is the source of his knowledge.
I guess that is a particular thing, not a universal thing.
Maybe.
Does anybody else ever think about revelation? I mean, you're all talking from a philosophical standpoint, And partway through here, he talks about switching from philosophy to religion because philosophy couldn't give him the good enough answers. So, when Jacob brings up Revelation, where does that come in?
I mean, revelation is necessary to know God.
Mm-hmm. He also talks about it in the chapter. Maybe it's how I see it. So when he's talking about, okay, so he goes through all the way from the soup through the next few pages, talking about different things he's observing in the world around him, what the implications of those things are, the people that he met, and the ways they've impacted his life. And I think that's the place where, whether through various means, God brings revelation to us. He tweaks something that gets our attention, and we see something in it of him and of ourselves. I don't know if that's what Jacob meant by revelation, but it's kind of, or we could just ask, what did you mean by revelation, Jacob?
So my whole thing in reading this has constantly been like he's trying to sugarcoat his beliefs into like ways that people. So I mean,
You're
I
right.
don't at certain times while I was reading it, I considered actually highlighting things, and then I would be like, this is just a work of apologetics. And I think ultimately he believes in Judaism because he believes in Judaism. And he's explaining to people why that philosophical ways of looking at things are failures. And like, does it really matter to him that the positivists have no adherents anymore? Or does he basically say, okay, this is an argument, this is a critique that will help you better come closer to my conception of things? And so, like, what does he mean by revelation? I think he means when he went and talked to Rabbi Soloveitchik and the Rebbe and studied Talmud and studied Torah, but he's not going to say that because he's a British lord in the House of Lords, and he's sitting there and primly and properly, like, talking in a secular space.
I don't know. I guess my problem with this is that like his arguments are really bad, in my opinion. Like I don't find them convincing at all, and so it seems like as a work of apologetics, I don't know.
Is he even making arguments?
Yeah, I didn't find an argument that he was really making, or at least not a strong enough one. That wasn't a thread that I was picking up on. I mean, if anything, the argument was like philosophy is not going to reveal God to you. Revelation of God is going to reveal God to you. And yeah, I don't know. I'd be interested in hearing more, like if there's a way to unpack it, because I guess I'm just not. I'm not saying I don't know where you're coming from, but I didn't think about it enough to be able to sort of offer you a coherent response.
Yeah, well, I mean, he kind of goes through at the beginning of Finding God. He goes through like the argument from design, and he quotes Mill. And he says like, oh, if you look at the world, you see mainly suffering, but I don't know. I feel like that was also pretty bad because if the world is really suffering and you can't see like design in it, then we should just kill ourselves, right?
Well, he does say that one of the things he loved the most about studying philosophy was it destroyed all of the logical arguments for God.
Yeah, I just don't think his critiques of the arguments are good.
Oh, so so you think some of them hold up better than he's making them out to?
Yeah, I mean, I think that, like bringing up Mill, I think Mill's argument against design is terrible. And then later on, for example, on page like 88, 89, he says like, he senses a trace perhaps many times removed of a remarkable presence or whatever. And like, that's almost like the idea of like the Aristotelian argument for motion, but with meaning, right? And so I just found like his critiques of the different arguments for the existence of God to be pretty bad. And then he does things like that where it's like, oh, so you're like using reason somehow, but you're also critiquing reason and saying it's inadequate. And then you're also kind of like making a pseudo argument that.
But Elijah,
Where does
if
he
you're
say it?
somebody who's already convinced that there is a God by philosophical arguments, this isn't the book for you. Like, he's assuming you're the type of person who already believes that all of the logical arguments for God have been refuted. And so that's who he's talking to.
But
Not somebody who needs stronger arguments against the existence of God. Like, he's not actually like, he's not an actual atheist.
But
Yeah,
he's making the claim that philosophy can't provide you this, right?
Yeah.
Because anybody who's reading this book, he assumes, already believes philosophy has failed to prove the existence of God.
But isn't it also Sachs's claim that like, doesn't he say this in his life story that he's like, oh, I didn't find it in philosophy and so I turned elsewhere?
So for him, yeah, I mean, he apparently found these philosophical arguments convincing enough. But at
No,
the same
unconvincing.
time, I think part of that is the fact that he was religious for other reasons.
Yeah, it sounded like his story was that he was sort of relieved to learn from his study of philosophy that philosophy was not the answer to, wisdom with a capital W. But I do take your point about his treatments of the ontological argument, for instance. I mean, it's all a little bit Mickey Mouse, but I think to Jacob's point, it's like the level at which the book's being written to in the audience. Like he glosses over the couple of proofs in like 3 paragraphs, a couple pages, and sort of says like, yeah, but like, this philosopher refuted it, and that was about it. So like, I get it. It wasn't sort of I wouldn't say it was a straw man, but it wasn't the most like in-depth fair treatment. But I don't know that was the point.
Then what was the point?
I think just to demonstrate that, demonstrate, maybe not the strongest word, just to make the claim that philosophy is not going to solve the search for meaning.
I also think partially he's just showing his familiarity with these arguments and like kind of being like, okay, you atheists, like you new atheists, yes, I have listened to all your stuff. And I am going to show you that I have, and I'll list some of this stuff up so that you can believe me when I say that's not the argument I'm making.
I particularly loved pages 90, 91 in this chapter. That's where he's talking about his meeting with Rabbi Soloveitchik. Well, he starts in 89, but he's talking about his meeting with Rabbi Soloveitchik and with the Rebbe, and he talks about what each of them is strong in. He's talking about the one, I just had it up on 90. But anyways, okay, so not only were these two, one in the area of thought, the other leadership, the greatest rabbis alive, they were also living remnants of the world that Jewry had lost. The Talmudic academics and Hasidic courts of Eastern Europe, more than 90% of which was destroyed in the Holocaust. I was determined, whatever the practical difficulties, to meet them, and eventually I did. In both cases, it did not take long to realize I was in the presence of greatness. I can keep reading through the whole bit I like if you want, or I can just tell you what I loved. Want me to keep reading? I'm going to keep reading. Okay. Sorry. Rabbi Soloveitchik, who I'm very personally going to enjoy reading the next few lines, formidably erudite in every branch of philosophy, spoke about the need to create a new kind of Jewish thought, based not on philosophical categories, but on halakha, Jewish law. Law was the lifeblood, the DNA of Judaism. It was more than mere regulation of conduct. It was a way of being in the world. Jewish philosophy in the past had based itself on its Western counterpart, and in so doing had failed to express what was unique about Judaism, its focus on the holy deed. For 2 hours, he spoke with an intellectual passion and depth far beyond anything I had experienced in Cambridge. My encounter with Rabbi Schneerson was unlike any other. The first half of our conversation proceeded conventionally. I asked the questions, he gave the answers. Then, unexpectedly, he reversed the roles, started asking me questions. How many Jewish students were there at Cambridge? How many were actively identified with Jewish life? What was I doing to engage them? This was something for which I was not prepared. I was on a private intellectual quest with no larger intention. I was interested in my Jewish identity, not that of others. I began my reply with typical English evasion. In the situation in which I find myself, the Rabbi allowed the sentence to go no further. You do not find yourself in a situation, he said. You place yourself in a situation. And if you placed yourself in one, you can place yourself in another. We were losing Jews, he said, and each of us had a responsibility to do something about it. Years later, I summed up that moment by saying how wrong people were to think of him as a leader with thousands of followers. A good leader, I said, creates followers. A great leader creates leaders. The Rebbe created leaders on a scale unprecedented in Jewish history. The rest of it's pretty good too on that page, but that I'm hoping, personally, I hope he takes that thought somewhere through the rest of the book, because that's the point of why any of us do what we do. If we are going to have a belief and we're going to have, if we're going to follow God, we're placing ourselves somewhere. And if we place ourselves somewhere, we have a responsibility to do something where we place ourselves. And I listen to all kinds of dialogue about that on here all the time. You know, we're in the middle of a meaning crisis. What are we going to do about it? What do we this? What do we that? And what do we believe? And every one of us believes something. And I wrote responsible beside one part, and I put a smiley face down further because, you know, as frustrating as life is, and all the times I sit on here and blather on about my family, that's the point of what he's talking about. You know, like, what's the point of me having had children, especially one like Jacob, where I'm going to just take him? I could do like my mother at one point said to me, I don't think I have what it takes the way you do. If that was you, I'd have put you in an institution the second they let me, and I'd have gone on with life. And to me, I'm like, okay, I found myself in a situation, but then I placed myself in it. And you have to plant your feet when we do that. This is the only part of this book so far that I have loved. So, anyway, that's the sum total of probably what I have to say for 3 chapters.
Emma, did you have your hand up?
Yeah, I have just a very basic question. Like, why is this guy called the Rebbe and then other rabbis are called Rabbi Name?
So he's actually reflecting a basic division that has existed in Orthodox Judaism for a good 300 years, which is there was the Hasidic movement, which started with the Baal Shem Tov about 300 years ago, and there was a reaction called the Mitnagdim, who were the opponents of the Hasidic movement. That's what Mitnagdim literally means, is the opponents. And they actually named both sides. They sarcastically referred to the Hasidim as Hasidim because it means the pious ones, and they were like, these people are not pious at all. I'm sorry, like she asked.
No, I've been really wanting to know all this because
They're making fun of me in the private chat. Anyway, so it's a major division in how the Jewish world views itself, the Orthodox Jewish world who views itself, and Rabbi Soloveitchik, so in English, if you say the Rav, and Rav is how like people from Donnie, it comes from Donnie, Chezi, and Yosef all come from the Lithuanian strain, or that's all that the Mitnagdim are called nowadays, is because they no longer claim to be opponents of Hasidism. So that's how they refer to their rabbis, is as a Rav, right? As like it's a very formal term. And Rabbi Soloveitchik was known as the Rav, to the point where if you're talking to an Orthodox Jew in English and you say the Rav, they know you're talking about Rabbi Soloveitchik, which like that says something, right? And similarly, in Hasidic courts, the leader is referred to as a Rebbe. And Rebbe is actually a familiar term, right? So like you call a second grade teacher, like Rabbi Mullet teaches second grade, his tagline on his channel is everybody's Rebbe, right? Because in the Lithuanian tradition, which he's in, yeah, I agree with Donnie. Make Litvaks great. Unfortunately, they never quite made it. I'm joking. So I identify more with the Hasidic thing. So Rabbi is actually very familiar, but Hasidic rabbis, the leaders of Hasidic dynasties, are called Rebbe, and the Lubavitcher Rebbe. Lubavitch is one of the largest and oldest Hasidic dynasties. So the Rebbe was the seventh Lubavitcher Rebbe, and he eventually, I mean, some people get mad when you call him just the Rebbe, because they're which Rebbe, as if everybody doesn't know.
are those usually people who follow other dynasties?
No, actually, it's usually Litvaks. It's Lithuanians who are like the people from other dynasties realize that in any dynasty, like you refer to the Rebbe, you mean your dynasty's Rebbe. But in Lithuanian circles, like when you say the Rebbe and you don't say which one, they're like, well, we're not a part of any dynasty. It's funny. But yeah, the Rebbe he became known as the Rebbe. And so these two great lights of Orthodox Judaism, especially in the United States, they were known as the Rav and the Rebbe. And it's kind of like, I hate to make this comparison, but like the Pope and the anti-Pope, you know, like there is that type of thing, even though like there's a video on YouTube of when the Rav went to visit the Rebbe, and like they actually knew each other in when they were in Europe, in Paris and Berlin, I believe. And so they were basically like this pair of leaders who had very different ways of looking at things. Yet, I mean, they honestly, like, Orthodox Judaism without the Rebbe and the Rav, like, it's impossible to consider what Orthodox Judaism would be like without the two of them today.
Cool. Thank you.
And Elijah claims I say this every week.
He does.
Just about. Just about.
I will admit to not normally watching, like, I do not default to watching Jacob run streams. I tend to watch other things and then wander over there occasionally.
It's okay. I will forgive you for not watching my 6-hour-long streams where I replay Jacob's greatest hits over and over and over again.
I do want to say that what Sandy was talking about and what it seems that Jonathan Sachs is doing is going from the absurd. So like Camus' idea that we have no choice, we're placed here. When like the Rabbi asked him, like, what are you gonna do? And he's like, oh, I have no choice. And the Rabbi says like, no, you do have a choice. He's sort of going to the Kierkegaard, like the leap of faith, like you can continue. And I personally think that like with all his emotional appeals, like this is sort of what he's doing. He's trying to teach us to do the leap of faith, but he doesn't really like that term.
We lose him.
Yeah, I had some thoughts about the leap of faith, or like his pages on faith. He talks about Gauguin, the painter, and how he had faith in himself and his art, but he abandoned his family. He wasn't recognized until after his death. Even outside of being recognized later, right? Like the fact that he made that kind of sacrifice, right? Like it wasn't clear from the book whether or not he does mention like maybe that's not a great thing to do, the rabbi, but he doesn't really condemn it either. And it's sort of like, well, what do we think here as a group about that passage? Like, at what point are we making?
No, I thought he condemned it as clearly as Rabbi Sachs ever condemns anything.
Okay, well, so you made my point for me, but
Great British restraint.
yeah. Well,
we have Rabbi Razin here. He can explain everything now.
Yeah, I mean, it seems like he also kind of defined faith as like trust, right? Not like it's not supposed to be completely blind, but you have some, kind of basic belief, and then you're willing to take the next step, even if it's uncertain.
Yeah, like a perseverance in the face of unknowing. I thought that was good.
I mean, ultimately, I think it's all unknowing in a sense, right? Because if you're looking at the like he makes a distinction between the universals and the particular, and he says somewhere about how meaning is only found in the particular. But the universal is the like sort of is sort of the knowing in a sense, right? Like when he talks about like Plato and Aristotle, like, and they all have these universal ideas, right? They can be like applicable everywhere, right? Just like science, it's like applicable everywhere. It's universal, right? But the particular is, and I think that's why I kind of find it interesting. Yeah, I don't know if he brings this up. It's just my feeling, but like Judaism is it's like a mix between universal and particular in a very like interesting way, because you hear things like, God is the king of the universe, like he's the king of everything. But at the same time, he's constantly referred to as the God of Israel, right? Which is a very particular, name, I guess. And so like how you kind of like meet, where the two kind of meet is like, tricky, I guess.
Yeah. No,
and so my point was basically like, with the particular, you got to have, at least it seems like you got to have faith, right? Because you can't, like, if you're listening, if you agree with Rabbi Saxon, what he's saying about, like the philosophical arguments for God don't work or something like that, and like if you accept that, then you have no choice but to put in faith, right? Because you can't like, what's like, otherwise, basically what I'm trying to say is like, what's the difference between this particular and another particular, right? Like why, like if you're a Christian reading this, or like you're from the West and you kind of like had a Christian background, you're reading his book, like you're probably going to be thinking of Christianity as being the faith that you might want to go back to after reading his book. But like, why Christianity? Like, why not Taoism? All right, like why not go to Rabbi Tech's Judaism? Like, these are all particular, and if he's talking about meaning as particular to the to the individual, then it's like, well, then why that?
Yeah, why not be a Canaanite?
Well, I've already made my opinion on the universal in particular earlier, so I won't comment.
I mean, that's all I had to say on it.
Jacob, do you have an answer? He shakes his head no. Okay.
I'm gonna shut up.
What about you, Jonathan? What do you think to Ryan's point?
I don't have much thought about it, really, to be honest. Give me something more specific. Give me something more particular. I thought his point was too universal.
Rabbi Raisin says, Rabbi Sachs' books, Letter in the Scroll and Dignity of Difference are all about the tension between particularism and universalism in Judaism and towards the world. Ryan may want to check out Rabbi Dr. Sam Liebens' video that I hope that's not the rabbi from the London School of Evil that I dropped in your server this week. He was one of the Rabbi Sachs students, but takes a very studied academic approach.
I think Professor Liebens is a Chabadnik, right? I think, well, I watched the video and I think Professor Liebens kind of talks about Pascal's wager, and Rabbi Liebens says that you should kind of decide from culturally relevant religions, and that's kind of what he suggests, at least with regards to Pascal's wager.
Unless overwhelming evidence changes that.
Yeah. But it's going to be harder to change, you know. Oh, he's Emma. Okay. Yeah, unless overwhelming evidence leads you to change your beliefs. So I guess Judaism is not a proselytizing religion, and you can see it in Rabbi Sachs. And I think it's hard for those of us who come from like universal religions that everyone must believe the same thing to maybe understand that point, right?
Yeah, but I mean, I think it's also confusing because it seems like Rabbi Sachs doesn't want us to do certain religions, like he doesn't want totalitarianism, he doesn't want all these things, and I think he said he does not want us worshiping idols, or at least he talked about the idea that, yeah, he doesn't. I don't think he wants us worshiping idols, and I think that's going to you at least have to make that point, at least. Like, I'm going to guess there's religions that you don't want us to join, and you should probably explain why. But I don't know if as a Jew you can do that, right?
Not really.
But it seems like he does make, to maybe back Trey up, he makes a point that there's like extremism and there's like bad uses of religion. And maybe Trey's question is like, well, how do you decide not to choose one of those if you are taking this kind of fideistic kind of approach?
I mean, elsewhere in the book, he talks about like, the triumph of monotheism, Abrahamic monotheism, and all that kind of stuff. Really, just kind of like, poking a little bit. Hey, check out this. I mean, it's not like full on, but definitely, little. Let's just say he's got a camp.
Yeah, it seems like a slightly weird argument because he argues that basically all the things people usually say are like arguments for God. You can't, if you're using those, you can't properly differentiate between like what is God and what is like another motivation. Like he talks about that when he's talking about philosophy. But then he talks about just making a leap of faith without giving a whole lot of concrete like what you're putting your faith in beyond like faith that effort will be rewarded. And he doesn't bring up this seemingly glaring, like the same problem can be raised. If you're just putting faith in either like the future or like something very nebulous, then you also can't know that what you're putting your faith in is actually God.
Why do I feel like a moment of Soren Kierkegaard is going to come up?
I think Yosef has a comment. He says, I dare say he would support anything that broadly is compatible with Noahidism, but I think maybe the critique that we are looking at is like, sure, that's what Rabbi Sachs would believe, but like why? Like what gives someone like the understanding they should pick a Noahidism over something else? Is that what Emma and Ryan, you're kind of maybe hinting at?
Yeah. That's at least part of it.
I missed that.
Oh, that's at least part of it, like, for me.
I mean, I just don't understand why he doesn't like do wellness studies or something that's like, we don't really have to really argue in the particulars. Like we could really just say, oh, these practices will make your life better. Here are the results, like religious people have go in their lives. Polygamy is something that causes errors and blah blah blah. Well, therefore Islam's out. You can sort of like use science to at least say, here's how we'll make you a better life, which I feel like is a better guide at least.
I think the problem with that is that it's only going to be based on your presuppositions of what better is, right? Because later on in the book, he talks about, right, Nietzsche and his particular morality. And so you might say, well, better is, some idea of superiority. And so we will select or support things that, mean stronger people instead of something like, a more equitable society, which, maybe Rabbi Sachs would be in support of. So I'm not entirely sure that you can do some sort of moral calculus.
I mean, okay, well, I think that we said, so first of all, I hate to bring JP into this, but it feels apt. You said that like meaning is only localized. I think JP would fundamentally disagree with that, and I would disagree with that as well. Suffering is what makes meaning, and we all experience suffering. And you can't just say, oh, there's no moral calculus. No, like, suffering when it hits you in the face, and you say, okay, and then when you are loved, and these things. Like, I disagree when you're like, yeah, I'm going to have some moral structure where it's like, yeah, I'd rather have 0 friends than 10. Like, I don't think it makes sense.
Well, one thing that Rabbi Sachs pointed out, which I think is really important, is when you understand the reasoning for suffering, when it makes sense to you, then you don't actually suffer because you realize what the sacrifice is for and how it, like, when you know what you are sacrificing for and how your sacrifice will lead to what you want, right? Then actually you don't suffer. It's when you don't know that you suffer. Like you're like, what? I'm doing this for no good reason. I argued that suffering is what makes meaning is an argument that's particular to Christianity.
I really disagree with that. I think the story of Job, I think literally the whole Bible is about people suffering and then us having meaning out of that suffering. Sorry to interrupt, but I disagree.
Yeah, I'm not sure. I mean, I remember I once was listening to a bunch of Ashkenazi rabbis talk about surus, and I'm like, I didn't even understand what the word surus meant because it's a particular way of Ashkenazi Galicianer way of saying sorot, meaning suffering. Like, and they were saying that surus is the most important thing in Judaism. I was like, you have such a horrible view of Judaism and I kind of dislike when Peterson says that like life is suffering. At the same time, I think theodicy is central, and I think suffering is what makes meaning. I don't like that because it implies that only suffering can create meaning. And frankly, I think like when you're holding your baby, like nachas, right? The like the pleasure that you get from a meaningful thing can be completely positive. And it doesn't necessarily have to include suffering. At the same time, I think it is possible. First of all, I think it's impossible to live today in a status where you don't have any suffering, right? And similarly, I think it's possible, hopefully, that eventually it will be possible to have meaning without suffering. Jason says, Dr. Martin Shaw mentioned once that there's an idea that fairies sit around the campfire to listen to human stories because our finitude gives more meaning or weight to our stories.
I mean, isn't there the obligatory Soren Kierkegaard quote where he says, life is best understood backwards, but only lived forwards? Not. I mean, it's the same sort of idea, right? I don't know. I just went on a. I was reading Soren Kierkegaard recently, and I read like his book, Fear and Trembling, and what's the other one? Christian Practice or something like that. And so I think he's like when I was reading him, so in like Fear and Trembling, he like gives like 4 accounts of Abraham sacrifice of Isaac, and he like it's interesting because he's like the way that he's like kind of picking it apart and like showing you how if different things were different in the story, it would lead to a different outcome. But ultimately, he's trying to say something like, what Abraham did was different from morality, right? It was like because you can't. He was saying that you can't, like, if you were listening to a preacher talk about Abraham sacrificing of Isaac, you couldn't just like, oh, today I'm gonna like be Abraham and sacrifice my son, like, but don't worry, God will stop me, like. It's like you can't do that. Like people would be like, "Well, you gotta chill. That's not what you should learn from the story, right?" But so he's trying to like say that like Abraham's devotion to God, and he was in a very particular, a very unique place for his faith, for that action to be, considered a good thing, or at least like. An act of faith, whereas we aren't in that situation. So you kind of need to like, in a sense, like there's a particular to each person in that way, and it's very interesting in that he was able to divorce morality in a sense from religiosity in that way, because I feel like if you take the meaning, right, that people say that meaning like suffering, meaning from suffering, meaning from death. People want to like tie it, right? You want to tie it to your religiosity in other ways, and that's what a lot of people will be doing. So yeah, I'll show you some. I heard I guess like some key insight.
What do you think, Emma? Because I know that one of the things I think Peugeot mentions is that there's a difference between the Eastern Orthodox, where they kind of have like, or maybe not totally Eastern Orthodox, but there's like this difference between like the suffering Jesus image, and then there's like, what, Christos Victor or something like that, right? Like the victorious Jesus. And it seems like, at least in Catholicism, there seems to be some emphasis on suffering.
There definitely is. Obviously, I don't know if it's like just a Christian concept or anything like that. Although that is, I don't know. My husband and I have talked about the differences between like the Catholic and the Protestant approaches to suffering and to Jesus's crucifixion. Because of course Protestants usually have crosses without the corpus on it, which is a big difference. But our conversations always have sort of a unique veneer over it because he comes from a charismatic background, and that's like a whole nother kettle of fish. I mean, as far as suffering being important, and I think this holds true for Eastern Orthodox as well, in Catholicism, the most important part of suffering is that you unite it to Jesus's suffering. It's not just like suffering on your own, or like gritting your teeth and enduring it, or anything like that. It's a participation. Which I think makes it very different from like any other view. So I don't know what to do with that.
It's good insight. And what about you, Sandy? We're talking about suffering, and there's no way that Sandy doesn't have an opinion on that.
I'm staring at my phone in part. Yeah, suffering. I'm talking about whether I'm allowed to go and see the ex or not. Yeah, suffering. I have a question actually, because we're talking about whether meaning is found in suffering, but I want to know what meaning is, because since joining here, I've looked it up a couple times, and it's one of those dictionary things where it says, the definition of meaning is how you assign meaning to things. And I'm like, so meaning means meaning. Awesome. Like, what is it? Is it just the labels? Is it the, like how we create a purpose for something? Is it we're assigning something to something, but what's the something?
Everyone's quiet because that was an excellent question, I have to say.
Yeah.
Let's give Kirk a try. He raised his hand.
What would you like to know about suffering?
Well, I just wanted to know, not necessarily know, but as it relates to Judaism's perspective on suffering, would you not say the story of the Israelites who had to suffer through, repeated like thirst and hunger and the dwelling of the desert shows that there's a similar concept in Judaism that you should accept suffering to gain meaning? From that story that the Israelites had to accept that suffering in the desert for them to reach paradise in Israel? Or no, is that not comparable to a Christian understanding of suffering?
Well, I wasn't sure if you're asking just generally, or if you were asking Jacob because of him being Jewish.
I was asking you.
Okay, so then
what your thoughts are.
My thoughts are, I don't know if it was mandatory, but I think it was definitely more marvelous. When I look at suffering in my life, and the thing I said, you weren't here when I mentioned my son Jacob had a lot of issues. And so we were talking about an early portion of the book where it's saying, where Rabbi Sachs was saying to I think it was to the Rabbi Schneerson. I think he was saying, I find myself in a position, and he said to me, you do not find yourself in a position, you place yourself in a position. So when I think of meaning in this context, I think of placing ourselves into that spot. If I'm not even sure if suffering is the same concept. If you drag somebody through something and they find no change in it, they have no engagement with it, they find, we say meaning. What is meaning? Meaning is that something that comes out of the other side or out of our engagement with whatever it is we're engaging. For me, I think that there's probably something. I think there's something that made the Jewish people who they were in preparing them to reach Sinai and find their identity told to them by what they went through. But I think we tend to, as a people, have a habit of making things perhaps worse than it needs to be. But even in that, it goes back to that thing where, like Jacob will always say, it isn't just that God makes good, but he makes all things for the good. I don't know that God would say, hey, I decided to give you a deaf autistic child who needs at least 10 surgeries. This is good, huh? But it definitely was for the good. There's a lot of good that has come out of it. And I used to hate that concept when Christians would say to me, God never gives you more than you can handle. It just, like pat yourself on the back. You must be able to handle this. That's the opposite of what I'd want to see going into this, in answer to your question, because if we look at ourselves and all we come out of something like a desert experience or any other trauma in life or any other challenge of any kind, even if you choose to do something that you think you might be able to do, but you're not sure you could do, but it's a calling on your life or something like that. If you just think, because I'm really that good, are you going to grow from it? You probably won't derive the same meaning from it. So it depends how you're asking that question. But yeah, I think there's something really important in what the Israelites went through in the desert that made the best come out of that. And so therefore, you were saying about making to where you had an end result. I called it getting to Sinai, getting to their identity, revelation. It's the engagement with God in every step of our life. That's meaning. I don't know how to define it. Every breath I take, every whatever I do, every time I signed to my kid and he didn't answer me, and 30 years later, suddenly he's communicating. That kind of stuff. That's a terrible answer. It's very convoluted. Sorry.
I have to say, I'm still kind of marveling at your question. What is meaning? Because we spend like this entire thing we keep on constantly talking about the meaning crisis, the meaning crisis, the meaning crisis, and like, what do we mean by meaning if we're constantly talking about the meaning crisis, and the fact we don't have a like pat answer, like that should be one of the first things we can actually, like, I could give hypothetical definitions maybe, but we're just dumping things into that word meaning that does Vervaeke in his entire awakening from the meaning crisis, does he actually give an actual technical definition of meaning?
Good question.
Well, it seems like we're using meaning in two different ways. It seems like the meaning crisis is more like the purpose crisis.
Apparently he does, and I haven't watched enough Vervaeke. What is that definition, Rabbi Raisin? And now that I know his name is Raisin, I'm gonna. He's not gonna hear the end of being Rabbi Raisin. Sorry, Elijah, I cut you off.
No, I was just saying it seems like we're using meaning in two different ways. It seems like the meaning crisis is really like the purpose crisis, right? And then there's this other sense of meaning that we use linguistically.
I remember I was talking to my Rabbi Wagner, about the meaning crisis, and he told me he doesn't like the word meaning, and he gave. I think he said it's not a meaning crisis; it's a purpose crisis.
Yes, because it seems like meaning is something like, the significance of something and your relationship, or your relationship to an object or thing or idea. And yeah, then it seems like when we talk about meaning, it generally is purpose. Our place in the world, how things ought to be. So
I'm still waiting on Yosef to give us a Vervaeke's definition of meaning.
it's okay. Yosef's just a different kind of guy. He just asserts that it happens and then he just leaves. He's like, it's just true, and he just moves on.
It might be that Yosef has created a robot for himself. I mean, we may be dealing with Yosef
Joseph
raising
GPT.
GPT. Yeah.
That's so not what I was going to say, but I'm not going to say it. Jacob will have to figure it out for himself.
He's a rabbi.
He's a robot.
I think for Vervaeke, meaning involves he talks a lot about like flow state experiences as an important part of it. As well as contact with he brings up like contact with the numinous is probably the easiest way to put it. That might sound, I don't want to say more dangerous than it actually is, but kind of more dangerous than it actually is.
So every time you take LSD, you gain meaning in your life?
No, you need a particular framework around it so that the experiences are actually like able to be integrated into the rest of your life, not just terrifying.
Sounds to
So
me
if you
like
want to quote,
Emma did some LSD.
Nope, definitely not.
I was going to say, if you want to quote Rabbi Sachs, he basically says the same thing when he says, I mean life with a meaning that comes from outside us is a call, a vocation, a mission. To be sure, you can be completely secular and still feel a sense of vocation to teach, to heal, to fight injustice or poverty, but there's something kind of transcendent. There's some kind of transcendence functioning here, because life as such does not call. The universe is silent, nature is dumb. Life makes no demands of us. The concept of being called is one of the last relics of religious memory within a secular culture. So I think that's kind of what he means, right? Like when we're talking about the purpose crisis or the meaning crisis, we're talking about the vocation, the mission, the way they're looking for the bat signal.
Trey, you say no, you don't in the private chat. What are you tisking?
Oh, just the comment on LSD, I guess. Yeah.
What about it?
Jacob, what was your comment on LSD again? Just so I can.
In fact, you do not gain meaning in life every time you take LSD.
Oh yeah, I mean that's like saying you get meaning from going to Disneyland. I mean, yeah, Disneyland is fun, but you got to go back to real life. So, no, I think you need experiences that continue, not something where you're separate from. So yeah.
And the other thing Viveki talks about is that meaning comes from or is connected to the ability to switch frames or like switch between levels of analysis, I guess.
Did you say
He talks
frames?
about that too. Yeah, frames.
Okay.
So he connects it a lot to relevance realization and sort of getting outside of our everyday ways we consider things relevant. I'm just looking at my notes from the first 12 episodes of Awakening from the Meaning Crisis, to be honest. Because that's as far as I've got.
That many episodes?
What?
How many episodes? 12?
I have notes for the first 12. I've watched the first 12. There are 50.
Wow. Yeah. I've watched a few of them, but I'm kind of watching either end to the middle.
Yeah.
Do you want to open up that link that Yosef sent, Jacob?
Working on it.
I think, has anyone other than Emma watched more than 12 episodes of Verveki? Anyone beat her?
I think I've watched like 20.
Oh,
There's 50 in the series.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think I went through all of them at one point. I watched them at 2x speed though, and I can hardly remember half of them. It's like not great probably for like 2x speed, and probably needs a couple of revisits before it really sinks in.
I recognize this guy. I must have
How would you
watched
define
some of this.
the meaning? What do you think is this meaning crisis that's going on right now in today's society?
So I think the term meaning is being used as a metaphor. The term, and it's a metaphor designed, as you said, to express this intuitive sense we have and the fact that we pursue something. Well, of course, we are also very capable of pursuing things without having a clear understanding of what it is we're pursuing. That's the source of a lot of human tragedy in a lot of ways. But anyways, what people are saying is there's something about the quality of the organization of their life and how they're living it that's analogous to how a sentence coheres together, and then how that sentence is significant to them, has an impact on their fundamental understanding of themselves and the world, right? And then how that sentence could also be used to make their thoughts, relevant to other people, connected to other people, enabled to clarify their thinking to other people. So I would say if we look at it, then just some of the research, I'm doing this with Jim Kim and Talia Franzidis and Philip Vesevic we're working right now on a paper trying to integrate all the psychological accounts of what's meant by meaning in life. We're going to be presenting it at APA this year and then trying to get it published. So I want to make it clear that I'm also speaking on their behalf, but I'll be adding elements of my own thought as well. So what the research seems to be pointing is what people mean when they're talking about meaning in life is a sense of coherence, that there is a comprehensive intelligibility to their life in some important ways. So there's definitely this cognitive, and that can be enhanced by experiences of sort of insight or a sense of getting a more deeper illumination about the underlying intelligibility of things. Then, of course, I think part of it is that it makes an impact. It's significant to you. I think part of what people mean by meaning in life is kind of an internal version of this coherence. That the way they're living their life is reducing inner conflict and giving them a fullness of being, where all the different parts of the psyche are cohering in such a way that each one is getting sort of as much life as it can without trespassing on the life of other components of the psyche. So reason and emotion and motivation and magic, all of these things are at peace with each other. And I don't mean just in the lack of conflict. I mean in the sense of there's kind of an optimization of fullness of being. And then the next part of that is a sense of connectedness. I think fundamentally people want to feel that they have connections to other human beings. We know that contributes significantly to meaning in life. And then I think above all of this sense of intelligibility, this sense of, for lack of a better word, inner peace, and the sense of being connected to other people and to the environment, being connected to the natural world, to the cultural world matters. I think above all of that is sort of a meta component, which is that this is all real, that it's not being generated by delusion, and that all of this is really actually helping people to overcome the foolishness, the self-deception in their own lives, and to self-transcend into a wiser way of being. I think that's what people are talking about when they're talking about meaning.
I don't find that very satisfactory.
So he mentioned intelligence, inner peace. What was the third one?
Connectedness?
Connectedness and a sense that it's all real.
Yeah, you could just say not wanting to hurt your name yourself. I think that's the simplest definition.
What he said kind of makes sense to me. But it doesn't make sense in terms of the way, like, I would find it very hard to explain why. Everything I talk about reveals meaning in my life, but it doesn't give a definition. Well, yes, it does. Depends on what you mean by the word definition. Yes, it does give definition to it, but not
So,
like a definition.
full Jordan Peterson, we can't define that single word we use.
Definition like in art, you know, how fine is the line, how much is the shading, how much can you see it, does it bring it into a fuller, clearer picture or not, that kind of meaning.
Okay, but is that meaning objective?
Why would it be objective?
I'm not saying it's is it better to be objective?
What I just said? So what I just said is anything that so tonight, if you watch me, if you listen to what I'm saying or whatever, everything that I am doing is expressing meaning that I have already found and I'm finding and experiencing in this moment in my life. If it brings it into good, clear definition, you'll see something of that simply by engaging with me. If it doesn't bring it into, if it doesn't do that, then you won't. I mean, that's what I'm getting out of objective. Objective is something from outside of myself, so I can't answer whether it's objective.
So it can be objectively realized, but not put into words precisely.
Maybe. I'm giving a good shot at it. Anybody else got a better take on it?
No, I don't know. Does anybody else have anything?
I kind of brought up the whole context of meaning, so just what I heard from what Yosef sent, that it touches those places in an experiential way, which hits the top thing. Is it real? Well, in my estimation, what I got out of what that said, definitely it's real, and it does speak to places of connection. And yeah, it does go to, whether creating I've already forgotten, like the intellect. When I think of that in those words, I think of teaching Jacob language and the 5 billion ways you attempt to come at a problem of showing this is that to somebody.
There's also if it's a realized meaning, so it's a meaning you experience in the moment. There's also the idea that you get meaning from knowing that other people can get meaning from your meaning, or they realize meaning from your meaning. If you're building a house, the meaning that you get in the moment is also realized by the fact that someone else is going to realize it when they walk in the house and enjoy it. So in that sense, everybody's meaning will affect other people's meanings.
Yeah. Community and what is it? Jacob? Some kind of shared distribution, cognitive,
distributed cognition.
Thank you. Yes, that. We create meaning together, and it has more definition together. Then it has the way I was showing it, like where you find the boundaries, the edges, and the intensity of whatever the meaning is in community. Alone by ourselves, we can do something that resembles that, but I doubt it's the same thing.
Does anybody have thoughts related to the last two chapters we read? Because we seem to be kind of focusing on the fourth chapter, Finding God, but there was also What We Stand to Lose and Human Dignity. Do people have thoughts about those?
Yes, the majority of my thoughts are there. I think I already posted it, but I feel, I don't know if this is in the fifth or the sixth chapter, but it's sort of the same place. I thought his points on China and Russia being fully atheism, and because of atheism is why everything went bad. It just felt like sort of a priori, like this is obviously true. When I feel like he needed to argue for that, he needed to work uphill to sort of explain like why does it do that, rather than just saying we all see this. I don't know if you guys felt that way.
I think the point he was trying to make with the Renaissance humanists is that there's no barrier to creating such a society as, you know, the communists or the Nazis without God, right? It seems like there are no breaks.
There are no breaks. There are no breaks. Because I feel like you could say, well, there's a lot of like Christian nations that have like done the same things as like Russia or whatever, or at least are in a set of chaos where religion is not helping it. At the very least, like why can't it just be economic conditions or history? Like I would probably argue that Russia was going to have a regime change no matter what, and it was going to be something that would be totalitarian. Like, what wasn't Italy? Italy still was like, even though it was fascist, it still was religious, and it was like on the pathway to committing the same amount of crimes, right? Or am I crazy?
Well, I don't know. I don't think that fascist Italy was necessarily committed as many crimes as the Russians or the Nazis. And I think there's also Spain, which was also fascist and much more religious, it seems, than Russia. But for economic conditions, I don't know. That seems to be a very deterministic perspective on the world, right? And Rabbi Sachs also argues against that when he mentions the Renaissance thinkers, right? He seems to mention the neo-Darwinists and the other kind of scientism believers that argue against free will. So it seems like you're kind of claiming fate or inevitability, and Rabbi Sachs is saying, you know, he doesn't believe that.
Well, I mean, I think yeah, but I'm not saying it seems like it's more the inevitability of like we all die. Like if we do not have a state where the state does not trust the government, then of course it's going to collapse. The German state did not trust the government, right? So that they were going to trust any leader that at least had an authoritarian leaning. And I think that's pretty obvious, but yeah.
Elijah, are you gonna go?
You can go, Kurt.
I just wanted to know, do you know whose mic is cracking up, or is it just on my end? Okay.
Well, why do you believe it's an inevitability, Trey? Like, why? Because it seems like you are suggesting that in like the time of crisis, some sort of, you know, strong man will inevitably come in.
Yeah, I guess that would just be how history works. And of course, history doesn't repeat. Of course, history isn't always going to be consistent, but I don't see where that hasn't proved true, where we have some sort of like economic crisis or some sort of lack of identity in the state, and then we have some sort of hero that comes to rise and is usually totalitarian. cough cough 2016, but yeah.
Well, I think that maybe then you agree with the determinists, and like people like Spengler, where I think someone like Rabbi Sachs would say that the point of religion and free will is that we stop that, right? The kind of base animal cycle is meant to be stopped, and that's the purpose, to try and do it. If it succeeds all the time, I'm not sure.
Well, okay. Well, first of all, I think Rabbi Jonathan Sachs would also be a determinist because I think he's arguing that without religion, we will have bad things happen. So that would also be the same as me saying that if economic collapse happens, we will also have bad things happen. Um, right? I think we can hold free will. We're all saying that usually we can hold free will and have physics at the same time. Does that make sense?
I think I understand your point. I'm not sure I agree that that's what Rabbi Sachs is saying, but I understand where you're coming from.
Okay.
Anybody else have thoughts on the final two chapters?
Okay, if nobody's gonna go, I'll say the part that I liked. I didn't agree with the whole regime points about like Russia and China, but I did agree with his points on sort of building up the idea of like what humans are and saying that we can either view them as fully, not fully divine, but at least having divinity, or it can view them as more or less matter, and that change is going to have some implications. I fully agree with that because I think he built it up. He basically said, how we view people affects things, and I would definitely agree that his idea of not just saying, morality is not just don't kill people. Morality is very much about virtues, like what we should strive for, and it seems like today it's very much utilitarian or nothing else. Like we don't really care about like, yeah, you could do this thing, but is it the best good you can do? So I agree with that idea at least.
I think I liked the chapter 6 the best, where he did just sort of walk through that. Partly because I just find like arguments and discussions about human dignity really interesting. Um, yeah.
What about human dignity is interesting?
Well, he was talking about like human cloning and then how he got to the point where like human cloning is even thinkable. Um, and I don't know, I think his like discussion of how fragile the idea of human dignity is and how like difficult it is to preserve, whether or not his solutions that I don't think he's really offered yet. Um, Regardless of how accurate they are, I think how delicate it is really true. And I think this is something the Catholic Church, at least like the people I have like read and listened to have really been talking about lately. Um, especially with things um like human cloning, like IVF. Um, it's just, I don't know, an important topic to me, I guess.
I agree. There was actually like something that's come to mind. I was watching this sort of atheist speaker talk about evolution and how like creationists are dumb. But then someone asked him a question in the crowd like, could we, if we wanted to, um, basically impregnate a chimp with human DNA? And he said yes. And then he said, but we shouldn't do that because of the ethical considerations. And I was like, wait, what? Like,
Where'd those come from?
yeah. Well, also it's like if we are the same common ancestors, and you know that it's only certain environmental conditions that separates us, why not? You could just like you can make the argument that like just kill it afterwards. Like it was, it seems the same thing when we're talking about like what is it, human gene editing, where we're basically able to edit people's genes, and
Mm-hmm.
the only reason we don't like it is not because we like vibe with human dignity. It's just because we don't want to be Nazis, I think, if we're being honest. Like human dignity is more or less we just don't want to be Nazis. That's why we shouldn't do it. I don't know.
Yeah, it's like we feel like this is important and we want to hold on to it, but we don't have like a coherent argument for number one, what exactly it means, and number two, exactly how to hold on to it without some sort of religious code. So it's just sort of floating there threateningly all the time.
Because doesn't he say, like, to quote him here, he says, there is no way of inferring from how things are to how things ought to be. And I think that's the famous sort of like, you can't derive you can't derive an ought from an is, right?
Mm.
And that's kind of the predicament that we're in as a society, right? Like we like to go back, he also says, but when science is worshipped and religion is dethroned, then a certain decision has been made to set aside human feelings for the sake of something higher, nobler, and larger. From there, it is a short distance to hell. And I think that's like it has that sort of issue. Like when you said that we just don't want to be Nazis. I think that's like a very astute observation. Like people want to distance themselves from Nazism, but like somewhat ironically end up embracing some of the tenets of Nazism, trying in a way of trying to get away from it because they can't ground themselves in anything. They're trying to just simply observe and be neutral, right? And they're neutral observers and look at the world and be like, but we can get this from that. We can get, we can derive our entire our entire motives, our oughts from science. Like the scientists can tell us that, we shouldn't. Like the abortion issue is obviously a big one. Like everyone has an opinion on abortion, right? Like this is like kind of like standard politics. Right? Everyone has an opinion. Despite the fact that I guess none of us here are like human fetal biologists or medical professionals, but we all have an opinion about abortion, and maybe you're pro-choice, maybe you're not, but the point is that we can't, like, when we have a discussion like this, nobody, or I should say few people are going to just base it on some sort of like grounding that's not evidential science. Like if you listen to people have abortion debates, 90% of it is science, right? Like they're talking like, well, this is the baby and it's like in a fetus and And this is when it gets brain activity, right? Like if you listen to like the recent debate between Lila Rose and Destiny on the whatever podcast, right? This is the sort of thing that they talked about a lot of the time, but it's completely irrelevant, right? Like when a baby develops brain function, or when a whatever trimester you're talking about, it's completely irrelevant, because morality, you can't derive it from what is. You can't look at the fetus in a scientific way and be like, okay, we can pick apart this particular developmental stages of when this is okay, when this is not okay, and stuff like that. Because somebody has to draw the line. You have to draw the line in the sand somewhere, right? So, and that's part of this like societal issue that we have, is that we like. I want to bring it back to like the Council of Trent, right? When the Pope said that if the Protestants continue their way, they're not going to have no Pope. They're going to have 1,000 popes, right? Each man's going to become their own Pope. This is sort of the same thing that's happening today, right? Like every single person is their own morality Pope, I guess, right? We're not we don't have a foundation anymore. Like at least back in the back in the day, I guess we had like the Christian morality as a foundation, but today everyone's their own Pope.
Yeah, and I think it's even worse because at least with the Protestant Reformation, you still have sola scriptura, so you at least have some basis that you can point to. But now, I think I mentioned this I had an argument with Jacob on the Discord a couple of weeks ago about this, where now we don't even have like a shared common grounding or language, and so it just means that how do you even come to the idea that human life has worth that you should kill or not kill? And it seems like the argument that you're mentioning is more of an argument of like semantics. When does such a clump of cells become a human or a baby? And it's like it's almost used to say that, well, your position is incoherent, so then we can just do my position. So
yeah, in a way, that's like what I think is going on.
all right, Sandy, I know you said you didn't have much to say about the end of the book, but I know you got something in there, Sandy. Come on.
I don't have a lot to say about the end of the book. You guys already talked about a lot of the good stuff from the chapter. Yeah. I just love the last few paragraphs.
Why is that?
Why? Well, I'm looking at like the bottom of 126. I'm looking where I've marked it. No, it is no accident that freedom occupies a central place in the Hebrew Bible, but only a tenuous place in the annals of science. Relationship of soul to body or mind to brain is precisely analogous to the relationship of God to the physical universe. If there's only a physical universe, there is only brain, not mind, and there's only the universe, not God. The non-existence of God and the non-existence of human freedom go hand in hand. That's really interesting saying. Like the paragraphs that follow it say why, but I find that very interesting because that goes right back to the beginning of Genesis, where God states his entire purpose in making the world and in making man to be in the world and in relationship with him. And it speaks to this whole section there again goes back to Sinai. It speaks to God's whole, the purpose and the meaning God has placed in the world. You know, like, so he says the assertion of freedom as against its ever-present, ever-changing denials is what marks Abrahamic monotheism as a distinctive philosophy. We are free. We are choosing animals. I have set before you life and death, blessing and curse, therefore choose life. From Deuteronomy 30:19. Life is choice. In that fact lies our dignity. If we have no freedom, what makes us different from animals we kill for our own ends, sometimes even for sport? What makes us persons, not things? If we deny freedom in theory, eventually we lose it in practice, as happened in Nazi Germany and Stalinist Russia, and as may yet happen in new and unforeseeable ways. For the sake of human dignity, science must be accompanied by another voice, not in opposition to science, but as the humanizing voice of what once we called the soul. There is no greater defense of human dignity than the phrase from the first chapter of the Bible that dared to call the human being the image of God. I can't think he would possibly be able to write this book without saying something about that. You know, like, if we're looking at balancing science and religion, we're looking at balancing two things that call for our attention. He's already said he thinks they both have value, but that science can't have the value it does without the presence of the voice of God there in it, telling us who we are and why that matters. Like, that's my favorite part of this chapter. I have predictable favorite parts probably of the rest of the book.
No, we appreciate your insight, Sandy, and we thank you for sharing. All right, Mr. Jacob, you've been quiet for too long. What are your opinions on the last two chapters that we read?
I've been doing other things.
What? Unbelievable. Oh, Mr. Jonathan is back.
Right.
How is the little meaning in your life? Doing well?
It causes suffering. Yeah. Yeah.
Very good. Well, we were talking about the last two sections of the book that we read. Do you have any opinions on chapters 5 and 6?
I did have some notes I wanted to chat with you all about. I thought the excerpt on page 102 about civilization dying slowly and silently was a good read. So the whole paragraph actually, like, but eventually people discover that in the new social order they are more vulnerable and alone. Marriages break up, communities grow old and weak, people lack deep, stable structures of support. They become members of the lonely crowd or the electronic herd. They float on a tide of fashion. They dress in strangely uniform ways. They think in strangely uniform ways. It takes far more courage to defy the consensus than it used to when conscience was given dignity by faith. Wherever you look, in the arts and the music and poetry and the way people spend their free time, life seems more superficial than it once did. It has become a play of surfaces. Ultimately, life becomes disposable in the form of abortion and euthanasia. This is often the first warning signal. Like, I mean, I guess he didn't write this that long ago, but like, that says it pretty strongly, I think. Because I recognize all the stuff that's going on. So it's worrisome.
Do you think that this is unique to a group of people that lose their faith, or are these not in many ways observations of general human nature?
I think they're observations of general human experience. Maybe not human nature. I don't know. Like, it doesn't strike me that this is how it's always been. But I mean,
why do you think that?
Well, I said that aloud, and then I was like, well, then maybe it's just because I'm reading into my own time and experience, and so I'm resonating with that part and think, oh, it can't possibly have been like this in the past. I don't know. That's a good question, because I mean, I think if it's always been this way, then that kind of ironically removes some of the doom and gloom in my mind. Because if it didn't used to be like this, but it is now, that gives me more pause.
Yes, because I think of like now we have like Marvel movies and they're all kind of the same, and you're like, oh God, so superficial. But before that, they were westerns, and you're like, oh God, the same western 500 times. And if you go to like the Middle Ages, there were court romances, and you had all these different Arthurian legends, and they're all kind of the same. And you're like, oh gosh, no originality there. And I forgot the book, but there was this book by Goethe, and it has like a main character who's like this kind of like swashbuckling character. I don't know if I said that right, man. And then all across Europe, a bunch of people decided to like dress as him, like men, and women decided to like start dressing and acting like the like main female character. And so I don't know. Some of this, it seems to be like
Perennial stuff.
Yeah, just perennial kind of human things. And so
Yeah, what do you think though about like some of those things? Well, finish your thought, but I think there are some things in here that seem more peculiar to us today, and some things that are more, I think, timeless.
what are the particular things you think?
Well, I mean, just starting from the top, I mean, my sort of received wisdom is that marriages break up more now than they used to. Now, maybe so because there were social pressures and other institutions that were keeping them together for better or for worse. Communities growing old and weak. I mean, I think they always have grown old and weak, but they are replaced by, the young and the strong. And you can see places where that's just not happening anymore. I mean, I think Jacob's mentioned Paul's church a number of times, and like that's just the nature of a lot of these institutions now. They die out; they're not getting replaced. The lonely crowd, like the alienation from society. I think that's something that seems like it's. Yeah, I don't know in the past where that has been as strong as maybe it is now. Just from my understanding of like history and stuff. So.
Yeah, I mean, it seems like the breakdown of marriage and the breakdown of community. I don't know. I watched. There was an interview with Tom Holland on Unheard that I recently watched for his new book Pax, and it seems like there's some of that breakdown of marriage and the communities growing old and weak that happened there. But I do think the kind of isolation and deracination that we experience now does seem to be pretty unique to our time and place.
Yeah, but I wonder if like cancel culture that we have today was really just like burning heretics at the stake in the past, or what happened to Galileo, or so is it more oppressive now? Because he does actually make that claim. It takes far more courage to defy the consensus than it used to when conscience was given dignity by faith. I don't know if I take that second part as true. Like, was conscience given more dignity, or given dignity by faith, where now it's not?
I'm not sure I agree with that either.
Yeah, so then he goes through the 5 warning signs of civilization collapse, which I think are just kind of they go deeper into what I think this paragraph kind of laid out. I liked his phrase about Nietzsche on laboriously self-won contempt of man. Was that might have been a quote of Nietzsche's, but I thought that was pithy. Like how we're doing all this work and we've made all these technological achievements and advances in science and what have you, only to sort of, call ourselves just apes or, gene blobs. I found that to resonate with me too. Although one thing, last thing I wanted to call out, he specifically says that he does not, no blame can be leveled at Marx, Darwin, and Freud for what others made of their ideas. It's like, well, I don't know. That's a hot take.
Yeah, I also agree with that.
Like, I think you're responsible for your ideas to some degree. Although that said, like, if you're radically misinterpreted, then it may not be entirely fair to lay the blame at your feet. I think you know a thing or two about that around here.
No, I mean, I do have questions about that because, like, for instance, like, okay, so I want to put it like maybe to you, like, I don't want to use the Bible in this analogy, but maybe I'll use the Quran. In the Quran, there is a verse that some people have called the sword verse, right? So it goes that, it goes, kill the polytheists wherever you find them. And it's a very infamous verse. I don't know if you've ever been in like the Christian anti-Islam circles, they'll quote that one a fair amount. And it's like my question is like how like people have used that verse to kill people, right? Like ISIS and the Taliban have used verse like that to justify the slaughter of people. But just how, like, but if you read the actual understanding on it that was given by virtually all scholars of Islam, Sunni and Shia, you find that the verse doesn't say that at all. And if you read it in context, you'll see that it's talking about defensive fighting, right? It's saying like the historical context is that the polytheists want to kill Muhammad and his followers in the sanctuary of Mecca, where they've signed an agreement that they will not fight. So the verse came down to Muhammad to tell him that he could fight them even in the sanctuary where no killing was allowed, right? So just how responsible is the author of the Quran, whether you think that's Muhammad or Allah, is for the people like ISIS and the Taliban for the killing? Because it, on one side you could say like they're radically misinterpreting it, but on the other side, like, are they? Like, if you have to have this justification outside the Quran, like you have to look outside the Quran, like to the historical context, like, is it really a misinterpretation? Like, where do you like draw the line between who's radically interpreting the text or the idea?
Does that go back to some of what was it today or was it when I was back listening to Wednesday? I don't know which, but where Jacob was talking with Cedric, I think it was, about they were talking about tradition and about like it's referred to in different ways. But that place where, like in Judaism, they have the oral law and you have the ongoing, living, breathing interaction with it. And they were talking about, you know, what is tradition within the Protestant churches? What is, like, how do we pass things on? So I guess my question to your question is, how much of it hangs on how well we're doing that component of it? Because if you simply write something down, it's the same as if, like I write a book, I put it away, it gets lost for 100 years, somebody picks it up and makes something out of it. That's not an ideal situation. Ideally I should be talking about it. It should be a living, breathing story that teaches as it goes. So then hopefully you don't get that place where it's misconstrued.
And my question to your question to my question, I guess, is also that, like, what about the people who say that they've unlocked the ancient meaning of the verse, right? So like, for instance, so you can listen to all day about scholars talking about the Bible, saying how like this verse in Deuteronomy is talking about child sacrifice, and this verse over here is talking about slavery, right? Like, and the like, like if you listen to what's his face,
Myth
I forget
Vision.
his name now. Huh?
Myth Vision.
No, I'm thinking of the Assyriologist guy who goes on there.
Oh,
He wrote a whole
esoteric
book.
guy.
Yeah,
Digital
and so they say
Hammurabi.
like, yeah, digital Hammurabi, yeah, and he would say like, oh, like the Bible condones chattel slavery, right, and all that kind of stuff, right? It's like, but they're saying they're like unlocking the true meaning of the text, like the ways the ancient people understood it, and it's like, is that a more authentic way of understanding it than like the continuous tradition that we have that might like nowadays interpret it differently?
Are they saying that in the context of the way the ancient people interpreted this, in the sense of, so now we've put a great enough distance between us and this people group that we have discovered, we don't know them, we don't know about them, we don't know anything really, but we're going to now allude to how they interacted with it, because that's a completely different thing. That's not
so
how.
they definitely do make that argument. Like if you read if you definitely read some of these scholars, like they also do that with like obviously like the Gospels and the New Testament, but with the Old Testament or the Tanakh in particular, they will say things like, like for example, I think the one that comes to mind for me is like Benjamin Summer, right? The Bodies of God, where he would talk about how angels are really an incarnation or like a manifestation of God, and so we kind of like over the time period we've just completely misunderstood what angels were, and now we've invented, or like sometime in the Second Temple period they lost the original knowledge of what angels are, and so they instead kind of came up with this new angelology of these divine beings, instead of them being local manifestations of God himself. And it's like, so then if we all profess, like if like the modern traditions will profess that angels are real, like they're real separate beings from God, but like just how legitimate is that reading, and how legitimate is the so-called reconstruction? It hurts my head.
That's the question you have to ask. You have to ask that question. That's one of the things I guess that I'm doing here, rather than in some of the, like, as a main channel in this little corner, rather than some of the other ones. If I'm going to ask questions about how the text was originally read, I want to ask it somewhere that people have read it originally, like in the original languages. Whereas my watching things down through the years in the church, where every time I turn around, there's another argument over who's interpreted which English version of what better, then I'm a little bit less, or a little bit more wary of saying, yeah, absolutely, every time you use the phrase the ancient peoples or the ancient whatever, that I actually think you perhaps know what that was. I want to hear it from people who've lived it for a long time. It's context. It's context. In a super, super simplified example, my son, when he went into the deaf school, the first question that you get when you're engaging in the deaf community, if you're able to sign with them, is, are you deaf or hearing? Oh, is somebody in your family deaf or hearing? If they find out that you were deaf or somebody was deaf, well, where did they go to school? What are the historic points of connection between us, is basically what they're asking. where do you fit in the community? How do you represent the culture? What do I know about where you went to school compared to where I went to school? It's going to tell me something about the kind of conversation we're going to have and how shared our language actually is. Because there's actually a whole whack of dialects across, the continent for even for ASL. If I think about any of the biblical languages, that's way more true. Even, I'm giving a super simplified example of something like that. When I sit and I listen to some of the conversations that happen here where people can actually still speak languages that have come out of the original languages, they are going to see something different in it than I will see. I'm kind of jumping to that conclusion, but I'm jumping to it from a point of saying, well, I've stood in between English and ASL conversations enough to know that somebody who's natural speaker of the language has got a way different grasp of it than I do. They're super kind to even tell me that I speak it well, because they're being very accommodating, very. So yeah, my brain just goes around those kind of places of somebody's telling me that something's ancient. So what's your connection to it? I don't know if that's even, I could probably went off on a tangent. Don't know if that's what you were asking.
No, I think that's interesting, because it's like when you're saying that your historical connection to it, it's like yes, you can have for instance, we can historically quite reliably, I think we're even historians often agree that you can trace the connection that modern rabbis have today to the Pharisees, right? You can make that bridge, and that there's a continuous student teacher relationship that goes all the way back, right, to Gamaliel, if not further back, right? You could of course they don't have the actual to use the Islamic word, the isnad chain, right? You don't have the actual and then this person taught this person, he taught this person, he taught this person, all the way back. But the Talmud and the Talmud where it talks about and then Rabbi Alazar said this, or some other rabbi said this. There's some connection here between what the rabbis are saying and all the way back to Second Temple Judaism, and then perhaps there's some unknown or some sort of intangible connection even further back, right? You might say that's the oral Torah, right? The oral Torah might be the intangible connection that the rabbis have to Moses in that way. But yeah, I just think it's an interesting question, because I think it's something that we have to wrestle with, as particularly for us, because since the Bible is so old and we're so removed from the context, the original context, that we have to grapple with the idea that people outside our communities, right, like the atheists or other people will try to utilize the original of what is a reconstructed opinion on the original text as if it has more authority to tell us how to interpret the text than what ours is, right? So Dale Allison talks about that as well. When he was asked this question, he said that it's literature, and once you write the literature, it's out there. It's no longer yours, right? You don't have the authority to determine the meaning of it. He gave an example, which was really interesting, of a book written in the 20th century, and this author, this lady, I forget the name of the book, but it was about these space aliens who came down and they enslaved humanity, right? And they're these weird spider or crab-like creatures, right? And in universities all across America, they were teaching that was an allegory for slavery in America, only for her to explicitly deny this. And she said that it's absolutely not true. I had no interest, no allegory. It's just a fun story I came up with. It's got absolutely nothing to do with it. But that does not stop universities to this very day teaching that it's an allegory for slavery. And so it's like, like she no longer, once she finished writing the work, she no longer has control over who interprets the book, right? And now it's like in the domain, so to speak. And like, I just wonder, like, because if we're talking about like meaning, like the life, like, the meaning of someone's life and stuff like that, like, are we also, like, can we also relate it to this sort of thing? Like, we kind of like, it's out there, and like, we no longer have a sort of authority on how we understand it. Sorry, that was a bit rambling.
No, it's a good question.
What did you all think about his discussion of the like the uses of medication, medicalizing human behavior? I thought that was a somewhat based opinion. I'm not sure if I agree with it or not, but it's like kind of, I found it surprising that he kind of took to that subject and had that take. Any opinions from the crowd on that?
Well, there was that breakdown of something in psychology about like the idea that the drugs we will give people will actually have an effect on their mental state. I can't remember when that occurred, maybe a year or so ago. I don't remember the specifics, but
As soon as you say medicalize, I think of the deaf community. They're one of the disability communities that really don't like being medicalized. The second thing I think of there was one particular doctor of psychiatry who was affiliated with the school and had drugs for every single kid. And there was grade 1. In grade 1, my son somehow banged one of the other kids into the door. And immediately the doctor wanted to put him onto something and called my husband and myself in to supposedly interview us about our son's condition. Instead, he sat us down and basically told us point blank what he was going to put him on, and talked to us like we'd never met this kid before. And I basically said, I'm going to go and review this with the GP first. And the first thing, and as soon as I took the drug name to him, he goes, he's 6 years old. Why does he want to put him on an adult antipsychotic? And I went, I don't know, but I did want to ask you that, because that was kind of my gut feeling, is we're not putting him on anything like this. There's things you can and should do with children with various issues. But when I think of to medicalize somebody and how it removes their freedom, I think it takes me to the place where we too quickly jump on solving somebody else's problem by doing something to particularly kids in school who, some of them do need some help with things by being medicated. But I also remember when later on they ran the Ritalin question past us, I had 2 doctors say, "What if it's just an intermittent issue? Just give them Benadryl; it'll have the same effect." And I'm like, okay, then why are we talking about these high and heavy grades of putting a medical label on somebody so that you can get a prescription into them? That concerns me, because that's a very serious type of removal of freedom from somebody. It doesn't give them a chance to develop what is actually there, because you've now dulled their ability to connect with the world. And I do say, I know that there are valid medications to give people and valid reasons to give them. But my suspicion kind of wants to ask the why questions. You know, why? What is it for? What does it do? What is it? You know, all those things. I'm not very comfortable with just saying somebody wants to label something and therefore come to a hard and fast decision of how to control it. You know, once we're controlled people, we're no longer have freedom. We're not actually ourselves. We are not people as God made us. And we do that a lot in this day and age. A lot of the world's about controlling ourselves or other people, mostly other people. What did you think about it, Jonathan? What was your question?
Yeah, I mean, he goes on to talk about like lobotomies, which I think are problematic, but there's a big jump from that to something like Ritalin or I don't know. I think that he wrote like there should be general concern at the risk of viewing ever larger areas of the emotional life as conditions to be treated rather than responses to be cultivated as part of moral and ethical self-control. I've gone back and forth on that in terms of my opinion on like medications and how quickly we prescribe them, or like even like self-prescribe, like people do all sorts of things off script. People medicate with all sorts of drugs, not necessarily even like hard drugs, but just off label things, like people, the whole nootropics world of like trying to dial in that perfectly customized dose to get you to be more, to be better. So I mean, maybe it's just something to be conscious of, but I think he draws a relationship between that medicalization and then also virtual experiences and basically things like artificial stimulus that are there to entertain or pacify or otherwise like control us. Yeah.
I do have a personal experience which sort of ties this in. There was a time where I was in therapy and they're talking about, I was sitting in the room with my mom and the therapist was talking about different drugs. And there was I remember vividly, she puts down her laptop and she plays one of the drug videos. And it's this child, actually no it's not, it's this monster that's jumping around the room and destroying everything, like imagine green-eyed ogre monster, right? And then they give him a pill and then he reverts to normal, and at the end they say blah 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 autism medication. So the idea that I think that it's already happening directly, and I've experienced that, and it's very weird when that's taken as normal to the point where you can like get past like a board of advisory just to say like, yeah, your kid that has autism, the best solution is to turn him from a monster to a normal human being is a pill.
There's layers of things there. One being that there is something that we call normal that everybody's going to fit if you don't have a label, and we can give you a pill to put you into that category is one thing. The other is what Jonathan was saying about the controlling the emotional, and I forget what the other part was, but yeah. I know where it was. I just closed the book though. Yeah. But what my thought there is, there was a point at which I assumed that the majority of Jacob's inability to communicate was autism based. And then when he left the stress of the home environment and moved himself into the group home and started working with a counselor, like an actual counselor, as well as the group home counselors. um, his behavior, his ability to modulate his behavior is hugely impacted by the levels of stress around him. So in the long term, he did eventually opt for some kind of anti-anxiety prescription, which does help. But it's allowed to come in a context where people that, yes, held responsibility for him were giving him the dignity of participating in his own healing, in his own, like talking through things with the psychiatrist, and, saying, yes, he would like to do the trial of, something to take that edge off the, sort of the razor edge of the anxiety that he had built up. And I learned that, for all of the good I was told I did as a parent, I had assumptions as to the root cause of certain things simply because there was a label there. And there's a danger in that, because even that, while it may benefit for accessing certain services, it also can diminish the dignity of the person, because it takes away from them their own autonomy, their own sense of self and who they are. And so, yeah, I think there's got to be some cautionary communication around it. And I know I certainly appreciated the group home staff coming in and giving a different perspective on the day-to-day. When you live with somebody day-to-day, you see them in a particular way. And when they live with somebody else, you get perspective.
Yeah, I understand that, Sandy, because, for instance, here in Australia, we have a free medical mental health plan that you can get on it, but it comes at a cost. If you get on it, you won't, good luck having a normal life, right? Because people will judge you, right? And it'll be harder for you to get a job in certain areas. You might not even be able to get a job in certain areas, right? Like, even if you have, so for instance, for me, I had a panic attack when I was 19, and after that, my doctor was like, "Oh yeah, you should if you wanted medication." I've never taken medication for it. I've never needed to. But they were like, if you got onto this mental health plan here in Australia, you're yes, you'll have free medication, but all the employers will see it, and they'll all know you're on it. And because of that, they yes, it is illegal to discriminate against you for mental health reasons, but they never have to say it, right? They could just say, oh well, he's just not the candidate for us, or we have somebody else who we think is better, or he just doesn't sit right with our company, right? They don't have to say, they're not going to explicitly say it, because obviously then you could sue or whatever. So it's the label comes at a great cost. As much as we say we're inclusive, we're we don't hate, we don't discriminate based off labels. We certainly do, and especially when it comes to mental health or some sort of disability in that way. Even if it's not a disability, my anxiety is never been a it's never been a thing that's clinically just affecting my life or anything like that. It's never been that way. But if I just decided to go that route, it could have been, right? And if I went that route, then I would never, for instance, one of my thing that I'm hoping to get into next year is to go teach English in Korea. And if I got that, I would never be able to do that. They would reject me straight up. There'd be no questions asked. It'd be you just can't do it, right? So, yeah, I kind of understand that.
And that's so weird. Funnily enough, one of my absolute favorite teachers that my son had in school was the best fit for that particular class, because he had OCD and knew how to use it well. because the kids, he just laid everything out for them. And the day was patterned. And, we tend to think of somebody who gets stuck in a loop and rigid. And it was like, not necessarily, somebody who's managing a difference that they have well can be an amazing, it can become as much a resource as a detriment to them. Yeah. So hopefully you get to go teach in Korea and do amazing.
Thanks. Yeah, it's one of those like interesting sort of things that we like. It's kind of like you don't even know about it until you have to deal with it. Like it's completely under the surface because and it's weird because you hear like what are all the people saying, like we're so inclusive, we don't care about this, like we'll help you, all these things, but in reality it's just not the case. Like Trey said that he was, when he wanted to join the military, that he had to lie that he had autism.
Well, basically that. Well, when I was in high school, we had like a assembly, and basically it said like career opportunities, and my principal basically said like, if you want to apply for the military, don't say that you have autism, don't say you have ADHD, because it's not going to happen. So that was kind of crazy to have like a principal of high school to tell the lie. So yeah, I understand that.
Yeah, it's the same thing with working in the government here as well. Like I've got family, let's say, in kind of like higher places in the government, and it works the same way. It's like you just have to like tell them what they want to hear, and that's how you like kind of like do get the places that you want. It's sometimes you just think like sometimes this like it's like when I was learning in university, we were studying like different cultures, and this is particularly like Asia Pacific, and we're taught about like this theory of performative, like politics as a performative like ritual sort of thing, right? Like people do certain things in a purely performative way, but somehow it has like legitimacy based off this performance. And I feel like society operates very much in the same way. Like we dance, we do this like continuous dance, and you can kind of almost like lie or like just pretend like you're like doing it correctly, and things will just go smoothly. But as soon as you like even if you are visibly not doing the dance well, like everybody else, like as long as you just say you are, people will be like okay, and they won't really question it. But as soon as you slap the label on it, as soon as you say that I don't, then it's like oh like now we can see. You've kind of broken the illusion that we're all like cohesive. I don't know, that's just sense.
All right, with that final red pilling, does anyone else have something they'd like to say about the book? All right. Well, we have two final tasks before we close out this lovely book club. One, to ask Emma if she had a good time on the 4th of July with her mother. That's the most important question.
My mother-in-law, actually, and I did. It was lovely.
Okay, well, that was a success then to put off one extra week.
I really appreciated it. Thank you.
No problem. All right, so then we have some sections. Do people want to read 2 chapters or 3 chapters? Jonathan is saying 3 in 2 weeks. What say you, Sandy?
That's fine. I'll probably be like today where I have read one of them really well and 2 of them so-so.
What about you, Emma?
I'm good with that. It's summer.
Summer, okay. And Ryan?
Yeah, I'm all good. I'm graduating on Friday, so.
Oh, well,
Woo!
congratulations.
Congratulations.
Based. Congrats.
Very nice. What's your degree in?
Asian studies.
Asian studies. All right. Very nice. All right, Trey, how many chapters?
Okay, baby.
I won't rock the boat, so I'll say 3.
You won't say. And what about our fearless leader, Jacob?
3 will work. Yeah.
Do you even read the book, Jacob?
I did actually read the book. Yes.
Actually, okay.
I
It's
did.
it's 52 pages, and most of us here went to college, and that was like a reading assignment for the next day.
Who
Yeah, but I'm
actually
not
did
in
the
college.
reading in college?
Yeah, Jonathan, you were a good student. What the heck?
I went to Calvin College. We're all good students.
Oh, okay.
No, you're all totally depraved. What are you talking about?
I know that's why we have to read the book to
Exactly.
avoid the devil at our rears.
All right, so I guess we'll read chapters 7, 8, and 9 for next session, and that will be Monday the 24th. Same bat time, same bat place, same bat channel, and hopefully with Bensi.
I will probably not be there.
Okay, well, everyone but Jonathan.
Emma's cat.
She's angry. She doesn't like being picked up, but I wanted her to say hi.
All right, guys, thank you all for coming. We'll see you in 2 weeks.
2 weeks.
Thank you.
Ending
See you
the
in 2 weeks.
broadcast.